Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of BiblioTech on Air. I'm Rosanna.
I'm Ruby.
And I'm Israel.
And today we are interviewing award winning comic book artist Jason Aaron. Aaron is known for his character defining runs on Ghost Rider, Wolverine, Punisher, Doctor Strange, and a landmark 7-year stint on Thor, which included Jane Foster's tenure as the Mighty Thor, and his 2015 Star Wars series became the best selling American comic book in more than 20 years. His creator owned works include the Eisner and Harvey Award winning Southern Bastards, the New York Times best selling Scalped, and Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. In 2024, Aaron had been leading high-profile launches for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Absolute Spider-Man.
Yeah, and before we get into the interview, if you haven't already, check out his work, his plethora of work, which is available on Hoopla and Cloud Library with your BiblioTech library card. If you don't have a BiblioTech library card already, and you're a Barrett County resident, you can register by visiting one of our 4 locations or our website, bibliotech.org. With that, thank you for joining us, Aaron. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first question, can you share a little bit about your background and the journey that led you to a career in comics?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the thing I've wanted to do since I was a kid. I started reading comics when it's pretty much how I learned to read was from comics. Back in those days, getting them off the newsstand, off the spinner rack at the drugstore, that sort of thing. I grew up in a small town in Alabama, so there was no comic book store anywhere around, but loved comics, figured out pretty quickly that, there were people who made those for a living, and I said that's what I wanted to do. I love to write from a really young age, and just kind of, that became a part of who I was. I've always been writing. I've always spent so much of my time writing, making up stories. Even when I was a kid growing up in the backwoods and playing in the backyard with my Star Wars figures or running around through the woods, making up fantasy stories in my head. That was little did I know that was, work related
Yeah,
training that I
definitely.
was doing.
Imagination at
So I
play.
always wanted to write. I always wanted to write. I through school, any sort of project I could do that involved writing, I was there for it. I worked on the school paper and the annual staff and all that sort of stuff. Went to college and took all the fiction writing classes I could, and started in journalism, and then ended up getting an English degree, and still didn't really know, had no idea how to break into comics. I mean, is a hard business to break into, and especially, living in Alabama, felt very far away from the publishing world. But in 2001, I won a Marvel Comics talent search contest, which was this kind of weird random thing that they have, you know, hardly ever done before in their history. And that kind of got my foot in the door a little bit. And then, 5 years later, I got a pitch accepted at Vertigo, which is DC's Mature Readers imprint back in those days. And that was Scalped, which became, well, it was first The Other Side, which is a Vietnam War book, and then Scalped. And that kind of opened the door for, everything I've done since then.
Yeah, it really, it took it off. Because, I mean, just from your bio, from what we've seen, what we have available on our resources, you're a front runner, man. Yeah.
It's such a catalog.
So thank God for that contest, man. That really, really happened.
Yeah.
Really pushed it through. Yeah.
So, getting into your story writing, how do you approach writing multidimensional characters, especially in established universes like Marvel and DC?
To me, it's just about kind of taking everything that's been established with these characters. Like, I wrote Thor for like 6 years, and there's a long history of great Thor stories, right? Going back to the original series, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and then there's a great Simonson run. There's all these great characters, great stories that have been told before. So you have to look at that and distill it down and say, what's cool about this character, right? What, as a fan, what resonates with me? What do I respond to? But and put that in your story. But then you also have to tell a story that we haven't seen before, right? Like, you can't just pick the bones of those great stories from the past and just do another version of that. I mean, with Thor in particular, is very much about making someone a Thor fan. There are lots of people who read that book who'd never read Thor before, and I have to show my work and put it on the page of, like, this is what I think is cool about this character. This is why you should want to hang out with them. This is what's different about their adventures. But then to show even people who've been reading Thor a long time a version of that story that they've never read before. So I think that's always a challenge. You know, now I'm writing Superman and I'm
Yeah.
writing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So again, characters that have been um, reinterpreted so many times over the
Hmm.
years, and you still have to find a way to um, give people the heart that they know from those characters. But let's do something different. Let's do something that we haven't seen 1,000 times before.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely.
So, what's your process for collaborating with artists, colorists, and editors to bring a story to life?
I mean, that that always depends kind of on the circumstances. I mean, like I've worked with Marvel for most of my career. Now I'm working with DC. So in those situations, everything kind of flows through the editorial department, and then I could be working with artists, literally from all over the world. Like I've
Hmm.
gotten to work with some of the most amazing artists from everywhere. So every time I travel abroad for a convention, if I go to Italy or wherever I go in Europe or overseas, I'll meet artists that I've worked
Hmm.
with over the years that I've never met face to face. So I've worked on plenty of books where you have, 3 or 4 different countries represented just in the creative team. So we're never all in the same, space at the same time. But it's different if you're doing like a creator on project where then
Hmm.
it probably you probably are working with somebody that you have like a direct personal relationship with. But regardless, I mean, I feel like my job as the writer is not to tell somebody else how to draw. I mean, I can't draw, and so I have no business telling these incredible artists how they should draw something. I just need to give them what they need, right? And then kind of get out of their way. So a comic book script looks similar to a movie screenplay, except that it's broken down into specific images, so I'm saying page one, 4 panels. This is what happens in panel one. This is what gets said, but I'm not telling an artist kind of do it from this angle
Hmm. Oh.
unless that is some way relevant, to the story. So it's all about coming together to tell the best version of this story, right?
Hmm.
Like you just have to have a creative team where we're all pulling in the same direction, and the important thing is the story. But
Yeah.
but for me, my part of it feels very solitary and very selfish, and then I really just write stuff for myself, just like I was doing when I was a kid. I sit down
Hmm.
by myself and come up with a story that I want to read, that I want to exist, that speaks to me in some
Hmm.
way, and then I
Hmm.
send it off into the ether, and then it becomes this amazing physical object because of the work of all these other people. But it's still my part of it is really just that. Like I still get so much joy and pleasure just from the act of writing itself.
Yeah. And so going back to your writing process, do you like so for Thor, for Doctor Strange, do you have already an end game in mind? Or is it like really just a process that you kind of have to go through while writing?
Yeah, I mean I mean it depends. Like um if I need to know where I'm going,
Mm-hmm.
with the story. Like I need
Mm-hmm.
to have some kind of destination in mind, even if I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there or how long it's going to
Yeah.
take. And certainly you can take detours along the way, but I always have to have some kind of have to know what is this? What is this
Yeah.
story ultimately about? And I think, with Thor and Doctor Strange, both of those, like from pretty early on, I kind of knew like, okay, this is where I'm headed. This is what kind of the themes of this story
Mm-hmm.
are going to be. And then you can still take more time along the way to kind of explore those themes. And you always have to take twists and turns
Yeah.
based just on publishing decisions, based on, well, this artist can't draw that, so we need another artist here. And well, there's a company-wide crossover this month,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
you always have to be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think to me, the important things are just the really the characters more than the plot. So kind of figuring out who is this person, what am I trying to say about them, again, what are those major themes, and then just jump into
Mm-hmm.
that, and then you can, if you, to me, it's about kind of clarity, having
Yeah.
clarity of of again who this character is, what's their world, what's the supporting characters. Once I have that, it's easy to sort of figure out stories that work within that. But yeah, like Thor. I mean, I had figured out. I mean, I wrote like 100 issues of Thor, and pretty quickly in my run, I knew like, okay, this is going to be the last scene of my last issue, so I knew
Mm.
like what the ending was going to be, and then it took probably longer to get there than I thought it would, but I knew where I was headed.
Yeah, and so how does working on like indie projects or smaller projects like Southern Bastards and Scalp compare to working with like major publishers like Marvel and DC Comics?
I mean, again, to me, like the writing process is not different. That
Gotcha,
part's kind of always
gotcha.
the same, but everything beyond that is very, very different. It's with the creator-owned book,
Yeah,
you're the boss. So
yeah.
you and um, every time I do a creator-owned book, it's like starting a new small business with whoever
Mm-hmm.
the co-creator is. And that the good thing is you get to make all the decisions, but the bad
Yeah.
thing is you have to make all the decisions. All the responsibilities are
Yeah.
yours. So there's good and bad things with that, but it's important to create things that I own a piece of. So
Mm-hmm.
someday my kids will own a piece of. Um, and it allows me to do stories that I couldn't necessarily do for DC and Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
So I always like doing both. I think as long as I'm in comics, I want to do work for hire stuff, and because I enjoy it,
Mm-hmm.
and then also have my own creator-owned books.
Yeah.
I've got a new one coming out in February of next year called Bug Wars
Yes.
from
Mm-hmm.
Image Comics, which is like I've said it's like Honey I Shrunk the Kids meets Game of Thrones.
Oh
Oh, that sounds
man,
epic.
that,
That sounds
that's
great.
the best collaboration.
It's like a kid shrinks down, goes on an adventure in his backyard, where there's civilizations of tiny people who live among the insects.
Oh,
But it's
nice.
it's the dark, bloody version of that kind of story.
Dang, that sounds sick.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
So you already kind of touched on your creative process, um, but like when you come up with these stories, are they all? Is it something that you come up with yourself, or has there ever been times where like the companies will reach out to you and be like, "Hey, so we're looking for a story along these lines. Can you give us something like that?"
Yeah, I mean it depends. Like again, different things are different. I mean, you know, the I'm sure I've done stories over the years where an editor reaches out and said, "Hey, like I did this Black Panther story years ago during there was a big Marvel event called Secret Invasion, where alien scrolls were invading the Earth, and the editor said, "Hey, do you want to do 3 issues of the scrolls come to Wakanda
Hmm.
and Black Panther?" And I was like, "Cool, yeah, I can do that." So sometimes you get a setup like, "Hey, we need a story that fits within this." Sometimes it's just me saying, "Hey, I'd like to do this."
Mm-hmm.
But I've never done even those situations where you're kind of getting a setup. It's still me telling a story I want to tell. Like I've never been in situations where somebody else is telling me what I have to write.
Mm-hmm.
It's still you get a lot of freedom. I mean, you have to kind of earn respect and trust, but I've been at Marvel for 16 years
Hmm.
and been, done a lot of big books there. So I think
Mm-hmm.
you earn that kind of respect where um generally, even though Marvel's a huge company, DC is a big company, it still feels like I'm working with a small group of people and we're
Hmm.
just kind of
Mm-hmm.
getting
That's
to do what
awesome.
we want to do.
Have you? So you said you have been there for so long that it took you that time to earn the respect. Have you always had that creative freedom, like from the beginning, or?
Yeah, I mean, I signed an exclusive for the first time with Marvel, I think in around 2008 or so, and I was doing a Ghost Rider was my
Mm-hmm.
first ongoing book there, and yeah, I kind of got to do what I wanted to do on that, but that was a small book, sort of taking place in its own little corner of the Marvel universe,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, you have to kind of work your way up the ladder to get to do bigger and bigger books. But I
Hmm.
think even when I was doing Thor, it was very much just me over here doing the Thor story I wanted to tell, and that
Yeah.
kind of became a bigger part of the Marvel universe as it went along. So I think those are always the the things I'm kind of best at, just
Mhm.
like, and the new Absolute Superman book is for DC is similar in that this is the Absolute universe is a brand new separate
Mhm.
universe. It's like a Superman story with as if he was created today as opposed to 1939. How does that
Love
character
that.
look
Mm-hmm.
different?
That's
So it's
amazing.
so um I love comics. I've been reading comics um since I was a kid, but I don't always like reading comics that are about other comics, like I want to take all the things I love about these characters and stories and again show my work on the page.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you've never read a comic book before in your life, you never heard of Superman or you never heard of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Thor, whoever, like you should be able to pick this up and get it, right? Like I should show you like this is what's cool about these characters in the pages of that story. So I think that's always what I'm trying to do.
Oh, I
Mhm.
love that because
Nice.
sometimes that can be pretty intimidating for people looking
Yeah.
to get into comic
Oh
books and
yeah.
stuff.
Mhm.
You just don't know where to start. There's so many
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
me.
storylines. There's so
Yeah, that
many,
was me.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's
And
So
very
even
considerate.
well, yeah, I mean, like I said, I wrote 100 issues of Thor, but that's over the course of like different books,
Mhm.
different series. It
Mhm.
would
mm-hmm.
be this ongoing series, and then that one changes its name and relaunches, and then there's a mini series, and there's another series. So sometimes now you can buy all those collected.
Mm-hmm.
They're different
Yeah.
collections where it's like
Yeah.
every
Mhm.
every Thor story that I wrote in order. But when they were putting together those collections, they would ask me like, hey, what order does this go in? And I would have to Google it myself. I'm like, I don't remember. So even I get confused as the guy who wrote that, telling you like, well, read this one, then read that one. So yeah, I get, especially if you've never been reading it, it's hard to know like, well, where do I start?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always good to have those jumping on points for people, every so often. And to me, I feel like anytime you see a number one issue, that should be a jumping on point, even if it's Doctor Strange, and there's been hundreds of Doctor Strange comics
Yeah.
in the past,
Mm-hmm.
or Turtles or whatever. Like if it's got a number one on it, if that creative team is doing their job right, you should be able to pick it up and get what you need to know.
Right.
Great, great, great,
So,
great.
adding on to that, what advice would you give to aspiring comic book writers looking to break into the industry?
I mean, the main thing I say is just to write the stuff that you want to read. Write stuff that speaks to you. I think
Mhm.
I think I see people who want to break in, and I get it because I've been there, where you're just kind of chasing whatever
Yeah.
opportunity you think might be there, and whatever. If you get an editor's email address, whoever it is, and you're going to pepper them with pitches for whatever books they do, right? Where you're just looking for any avenue by which to break in, and I think that you can drive yourself crazy doing that. Like you got to be a little more thoughtful about it, and I think for me ultimately it was just like what stuff speaks to me, what kind of
Yeah.
stories do I want to read, and those were the stories I did, and those were the stories that helped me break in. And I think I still believe the hardest part is just being good enough, like just doing stories that are genuinely interesting enough,
Mhm.
that resonate with you, that are going to resonate with other people. If you can do that, you can figure out how to break in, how to get your work in front of an editor or a talent scout, or how to put together your own book with an artist. Like people do those things all the time in all sorts of different ways, but you can't put the cart before the horse, and
Mhm.
you got to focus first, just be your own worst critic, but also not to the extent where you paralyze yourself from
Mhm.
from working and learning as you go. um and just focus on being good enough so that when you do get that opportunity,
Yeah.
for me that was that talent search contest that popped up out of the blue. That was a weird random opportunity that I got, but I had written so much stuff and focused, been so obsessed with just the act of writing itself, and of trying to do stuff that felt to me like, oh, I would pay $4 if I
Mhm.
saw this on a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
That when I got that opportunity, I was able to take advantage of it. So those opportunities come along. Just focus on being good enough that that when it does, you'll be ready.
Yeah, just gotta be prepared.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
that's some solid
Stay
advice.
true to yourself, and when an opportunity
come will
presents
come.
itself. Yeah. So we're towards the end of our interview, and as a library, we do like to ask, what are you currently reading or have just finished reading?
Oh, well, I just moved. I've been
Gotcha.
moving the last like month and a half, so I've certainly handled a lot of books the last few weeks, but haven't had as much time to read. What did I just finish? I mean, of course, I've always got a stack of
Mm-hmm.
comics on my desk that I read. Some of them, I mean, I can tell myself they're all work related, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot of stuff. I still love comics. I'm kind of still a voracious comic reader, even outside of things I need to read
Mm-hmm.
explicitly for work. But I would say one of my favorite things I've read recently was Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees it's written and drawn by Patrick Horvath, which is it's like what was it? Was it Richard Scarry? Those cute kind of kids books
Yeah.
with anthropomorphic animals. It's like that, but as a serial killer story.
Oh.
Um, really, really gorgeous art. Really, really, you know, wickedly fun, inventive book
Mm-hmm.
by a new young creator who I think is going to continue to do more and more cool stuff. So, and it's kind of, it's a self-contained story. They have just announced he's going to do a part 2, but highly recommend it to anybody. It's really, really cool.
Nice. We'll have to check it out.
For sure.
Yeah.
That sounds so cool.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, that's all the questions we have for you today. Where can people find your work besides our resources? But do you have a website? Is Instagram the best way to keep up with you?
Yeah, I am tentatively on social media, but I think the best way to keep up with me is I have a newsletter on Substack. So if you just Google my name, you can find that, and I send that out when I can, and update on everything I'm working on at the moment. And yeah, it's been a big year for me. I had a lot of new stuff this
Mm-hmm.
year. The Turtles and Superman were two of the biggest books of the year, and then I'll have Bug Wars coming out
Mm-hmm.
early next year.
All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much again, Jason, for joining us on our episode today. Again, we are fairly big comic book nerds here, so it's definitely such a milestone for us to be able to have you here on our show. And again, make sure you guys check out all of his stuff. We have it available on Cloud Library and Hoopla. And once again, just thank you so much, Jason, for joining us. Until then, catch us on the next episode. I'm Rosanna.
I'm Ruby.
And I'm Israel.
And we'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.